the HOA president thought she was the smartest person in the neighborhood. She spent months building a $6 million villa, but here's the twist: she built it on the wrong land. And the land? It belonged to a quiet black man she'd been trying to push out for years. When neighbors saw the trucks and construction, they wondered why he didn't fight back. Was he scared? Was he powerless? No. He was waiting. Because the moment her $6 million dream home was finished, he held the deed that made it all his. And in one shocking move, he took everything. Cornell wasn't the type of man who wanted attention. He had built his life on quiet dignity, a steady job, and a small but beautiful plot of land he had inherited from his father. For him, that land wasn't just dirt and grass. It was family history. Memories of childhood summers, the smell of barbecue smoke on warm evenings, and the pride of ownership in a world that often told men like him he didn't belong. That property was his sanctuary, his slice of peace in a chaotic world. But peace was exactly what Judith couldn't stand. Judith was the president of the HOA, and she wore that title like a crown. She wasn't just managing the neighborhood; in her mind, she owned it. Every meeting, every decision, every rule was her chance to remind people that she was in control. She thrived on authority. And when someone dared to challenge her, she turned ruthless. From the first day Cornell moved into the community, Judith decided he didn't fit. She would smile to his face at HOA barbecues, but behind closed doors, she filed petty fines against him, accusing him of leaving his trash cans out too long, claiming his grass was half an inch too high, even writing him up because the paint on his shed wasn't HOA approved. To outsiders, these looked like normal HOA regulations. But everyone in the neighborhood knew Judith had a target on Cornell's back. Cornell, however, didn't bite. He refused to give her the satisfaction of an angry outburst. He paid his fines, trimmed his lawn, and kept to himself. On the surface, it looked like he was letting her win. But in reality, Cornell was studying her. Watching the way she twisted rules. Watching the way she manipulated votes in meetings. Watching the way neighbors, too scared to speak up, let her rule unchecked. Judith mistook his silence for weakness. In her mind, Cornell was just another obstacle she could bulldoze over. And soon, she set her sights on his most valuable possession, the land itself. She had been eyeing his property for months. To her, it was underutilized. She imagined a grand villa standing where Cornell's modest home sat. A $6 million testament to her vision of luxury, the kind of project that would cement her legacy as the queen of the neighborhood. Through shady backroom deals, misleading paperwork, and exploiting her influence as HOA president, Judith found a loophole she thought she could exploit. If she made it seem like Cornell's land was common property or open for development, she could justify starting construction. And with her allies on the HOA board too afraid to cross her, no one stopped her. Cornell noticed the trucks when they first pulled up. He saw the surveyors marking his soil, the machines digging into his earth, the foundation being poured. Neighbors waited for him to explode, to storm into an HOA meeting, to hire a lawyer, to file a lawsuit. That's what Judith expected too. She wanted him loud and angry, because then she could call the police, paint him as unstable, and use the system against him. But Cornell didn't play her game. He stayed quiet, observant, patient. Every day, he'd walk past the growing mansion, nod politely to the workers, and return home without a word. And every day, Judith grew more confident. She bragged to her friends that Cornell was too scared to stand up to her. She laughed that he would soon be living in the shadow of something he could never afford. She even whispered at parties that once her villa was finished, she'd make sure he had no choice but to leave. Judith thought she was building her dream. She didn't realize she was digging her own grave. Because while she was busy gloating, Cornell was documenting everything, every deed, every survey, every signature. And in his silence, he held the one card Judith had overlooked, the truth. The first rumble of bulldozers shook the ground before sunrise. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, confused. Why would heavy machinery be pulling into a quiet suburban street? But when they saw the crew roll onto Cornell's land, jaws dropped. Cornell stood at the edge of his driveway, coffee mug in hand, staring at the chaos. Bright orange vests dotted his yard as surveyors hammered stakes into the soil. A foreman barked orders. Cement trucks lined the street, ready to pour the foundation of something big. Everyone expected Cornell to rush forward. To wave his arms, demand answers, call the police. After all, this was his property. But to everyone's surprise, he didn't. He simply sipped his coffee, nodded politely at the workers, and walked back inside his house. By noon, whispers filled the neighborhood. Is he letting this happen? Did he sell the land? Did the HOA take it from him? Some even wondered if Cornell was too scared to fight Judith, the HOA president who seemed untouchable. Judith, of course, was thrilled. She strutted around the construction site like a queen inspecting her kingdom. Finally, she bragged to a board member, "We'll have something beautiful in this neighborhood. Not that rundown little shack Cornell lives in." Her laughter carried across the block, sharp and cruel. Day after day, the project grew. First, the deep concrete foundation. Then steel beams reaching into the sky. Soon, walls rose, tall, sleek, and modern. Floor-to-ceiling windows sparkled as workers polished them under the sun. It was clear, this wasn't just a house. It was a palace. A $6 million masterpiece standing right in the middle of Cornell's land. Neighbors watched in stunned disbelief. "There's no way this is legal," one whispered. "Why isn't Cornell doing anything?" Another shook his head. "Maybe Judith bought him off." The gossip spread faster than the construction itself. But Cornell stayed silent. Judith mistook that silence for surrender. She doubled down on her arrogance. She began throwing small viewing parties on weekends, parading neighbors through the half-finished villa. Chandeliers were hoisted into place, Italian marble tiles gleamed underfoot, and imported stone decorated the walls. "Look at this," she gushed, sipping champagne in her designer dress. "This will be the crown jewel of our community." At one of these parties, a neighbor asked, "But isn't this Cornell's land?" Judith smirked. "Oh, please. Cornell? He doesn't know what to do with land like this. He should be grateful I'm raising the value of the whole neighborhood." Meanwhile, Cornell was far from powerless. Every week, he visited the county clerk's office. He quietly updated his files, double-checked the deeds, and ensured the legal descriptions of his property were airtight. He made copies, kept them in folders, and even mailed sealed envelopes to himself, a trick his father had taught him to prove ownership in disputes. On the surface, Cornell looked passive. But in reality, he was preparing for a moment that would shake the entire community. As the villa neared completion, Judith's taunts grew bolder. She passed by Cornell one evening and said with a smirk, "Enjoy the view while you can. Once this place is done, you'll be nothing but a shadow next to me." Cornell didn't reply. He simply smiled, tipped his hat, and walked inside. By the end of the summer, the project was almost complete. 6 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a pool that glistened like sapphire, and manicured gardens that stretched across the yard. The neighborhood had transformed. Judith's vision stood tall, bold, and undeniable. To everyone else, it looked like Judith had won. She had taken Cornell's land, erased his presence, and planted her empire where his home once stood. But Judith had no idea that every single nail, every single brick, and every single dollar invested in that villa belonged to Cornell the moment it touched his soil. The villa was finished. $6 million of glass, stone, and marble gleamed under the afternoon sun. Judith had spared no expense. From imported chandeliers to a pool that looked like liquid sapphire, every inch of the mansion screamed wealth and power. And today was her moment. She had organized a grand opening, a celebration of her achievement. Luxury cars lined the streets. Guests in expensive suits and glittering dresses sipped champagne while touring the house. Judith floated through the crowd like royalty, soaking in the admiration. "Can you believe this?" one neighbor whispered. She actually built it on Cornell's land. I guess it's hers now, another shrugged. Cornell never fought back. That was exactly the narrative Judith wanted. She had turned Cornell's silence into her victory. Then, just as the speeches began, Cornell appeared. He wasn't dressed in a suit. No champagne flute in his hand. Just calm, composed, wearing his usual neatly pressed shirt and jacket. He moved through the crowd quietly, as if he belonged there, which, in truth, he did. Judith noticed him and smirked. Well, look who decided to show up. Come to admire what real success looks like. Cornell didn't respond to the jab. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Slowly, deliberately, he laid the documents on the marble counter where Judith was holding court. I think your guests might like to see these, he said evenly. The chatter in the room died down. People gathered closer, curious. Judith glanced at the papers and laughed. What is this? Some pathetic attempt to scare me? Cornell didn't flinch. He pointed to the first page, the official property deed, stamped and notarized, with his name in bold. Then the second page, our recent county survey, clearly showing that the $6 million villa stood entirely within his property lines. And then the third, legal correspondence confirming that any structure built on his land automatically transferred to his ownership. The room went silent. Judith's face drained of color. This has to be fake. Cornell shook his head calmly. Every page is certified. Every signature verified. While you were busy building your empire, I was making sure the law would protect me. The weight of his words hit like a thunderclap. Guests exchanged shocked glances. Phones came out. Pictures were taken. And Judith, once so untouchable, now stood exposed. Cornell delivered the final blow with quiet precision. You didn't build your dream home, Judith. You built mine. And as of this moment, this entire villa is legally mine. The crowd gasped. Some even chuckled at the poetic irony. The woman who had tormented her neighbors, abused her power, and tried to erase Cornell, had just handed him a $6 million mansion on a silver platter. Judith tried to protest, her voice trembling. No! This can't, I'll fight this. Cornell finally allowed himself a smile. Go ahead. But every document, every deed, every law is on my side. You thought silence meant weakness. It meant patience. With that, Cornell closed the folder, tucked it back into his briefcase, and turned toward the stunned crowd. In that moment, he didn't need to gloat. He didn't need to shout. His victory was undeniable. The queen of the neighborhood had been dethroned, and she had built her own downfall, brick by brick. The grand opening that Judith had imagined as her coronation ended in humiliation. Guests who had come to praise her now avoided eye contact. Some whispered, others recorded every moment on their phones, eager to share the downfall of the mighty HOA president. Judith's voice shook as she tried to spin the narrative. This is just a misunderstanding. I'll fight it in court. But even as she said the words, she knew the truth. Cornell had outplayed her completely. The law wasn't on her side. Her arrogance had built Cornell's triumph, brick by brick, chandelier by chandelier. Neighbors began to drift away, shaking their heads. One muttered, all that power, wasted on cruelty. Another whispered, he didn't even raise his voice, and still he won. Judith's closest allies on the HOA board quietly slipped out, unwilling to be associated with her collapse. The champagne glasses sat untouched. The music stopped. And the villa, once a monument to Judith's ego, now stood as a monument to her downfall. Cornell didn't linger to gloat. He closed his briefcase, tipped his hat politely to the remaining guests, and walked out into the evening air. For him, victory wasn't about spectacle. It was about reclaiming what was his and proving that patience can be more powerful than arrogance. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was brutal. Judith's reputation was shattered. Videos of the confrontation went viral online, with millions commenting on the poetic justice of a woman who built her own mansion, only to hand it over to the very man she despised. The HOA board, once her kingdom, turned against her. Under pressure from angry residents, Judith was forced to resign as president. Without her crown, she was just another homeowner, one whose arrogance had cost her everything. Cornell, on the other hand, became the quiet legend of the neighborhood. He didn't boast about his victory. He didn't throw parties in the villa. Instead, he made a point of treating everyone with the same dignity he had always shown. His neighbors, who once pitied him, now respected him deeply. Some even apologized for not standing up to Judith sooner. And the mansion? Cornell made no rush to move in. To him, it wasn't just a house. It was a symbol. A reminder that injustice doesn't always need fire and fury to be defeated. Sometimes, it only takes patience and the confidence to let your enemy destroy themselves. Judith had tried to erase Cornell, to build over his history, to bury his presence under her empire. Instead, she immortalized him. Every time she drove past that towering villa, now belonging to the man she tried to break, she was forced to confront the truth: she had written her own defeat. In the end, the neighborhood never forgot the lesson. Power built on arrogance will crumble. But power built on patience? That lasts forever. And that's how it all ended. The same woman who thought she could steal land, bully her neighbors, and erase a man's identity ended up building her own downfall. $6 million, years of planning, and countless nights of arrogance, all gifted, without a fight, to the very man she wanted to destroy. Cornell didn't need revenge. He didn't need to scream, threaten, or stoop to her level. All he needed was patience, and the truth. Because in the end, arrogance collapses under its own weight, and justice has a way of finding its way back home. So maybe the lesson here is simple: sometimes the loudest power isn't strength at all. It's silence. Silence that waits, watches, and lets the enemy bury themselves. But now I'll leave the question to you. If you were in Cornell's shoes, would you have stayed silent and let Judith finish the villa, or would you have stopped her before she laid the first brick? Let me know in the comments. Backhand index pointing down.